Good morning. These are your Nassau Guardian highlights for Thursday, February 26th, 2026, brought to you by your Daily Bahamas headlines, especially for people on the go and those who are visually impaired. We begin with the main headline, deficit at $342 million. Government still projects a $75 million surplus this year. According to the mid-year budget review presented in Parliament, the government recorded a deficit of $342.4 million for the first 6 months of the fiscal year, which represents 2.1% of GDP. That is an improvement compared to the same period last year, when the deficit stood at $367.7 million. Total revenue between July and December 2025 reached $1.5 billion, an increase of $66.6 million over the previous year. Tax receipts alone rose by $54.4 million. However, total expenditure was $1.9 billion, up $41.3 million, largely driven by higher employee compensation and public debt interest payments. Despite the mid-year deficit, the Davis administration says it remains confident it can achieve a $75 million surplus by the end of the fiscal year. Officials point to the timing of corporate income tax payments, most of which are expected in the fourth quarter. That category is budgeted at $130.1 million and is expected to significantly improve the fiscal position later in the year. However, the numbers also show that government arrears and unpaid invoices have doubled compared to the same period last year. Total arrears and unpaid invoices stood at $241 million at the end of December 2025, up from $122 million the year before. Observers will be watching closely to see how those obligations impact the government's surplus projections. Also on the front page, the Royal Bahamas Defense Force says it is preparing for a possible influx of Cuban migrants. Commodore Floyd Moxey explained that tensions in the region, particularly following U.S. actions in Venezuela and the resulting disruption of oil shipments to Cuba, could create fuel shortages and instability that may trigger increased migration. The RBDF says it is positioning its fleet near the southern Bahamas to remain vigilant and prepared. At the same time, the Defense Force continues to monitor developments in Haiti and will rotate personnel supporting international security efforts there. Another major regional story highlights U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio's address to CARICOM leaders in St. Kitts and Nevis. Rubio emphasized renewed partnerships with the Caribbean, regional security cooperation, and economic collaboration. He pointed to transnational crime and illegal arms trafficking as urgent threats and said the United States is committed to deeper engagement with the region. He also suggested that a more stable Venezuela could ultimately benefit the wider Caribbean. In other national news, former Prime Minister Dr. Hubert Minnis is calling on the government to show us the money regarding the reported $100 to $20 million sale of the Grand Lucayan Resort. Minnis questioned whether any funds have actually been received, while the Office of the Prime Minister and the developer have denied reports that the deal has collapsed. Minister of National Security, Wayne Monroe, says new biometric voter cards are still on track to be released by the end of the month, although they will not be required for the upcoming general election. Turning to the editorial, today's piece describes the mid-year budget review as wholly inadequate. The editorial argues that the public deserved a more detailed and comprehensive explanation of the country's fiscal position, particularly given rising debt, arrears, and election season concerns. It calls for greater transparency and clearer explanations of how the government plans to achieve its projected surplus. In the letters to the editor section, one writer defends former National Security Minister Marvin Dames against what he describes as a social media smear campaign, urging Bahamians not to rush to judgment based on association. Another letter addresses internal Free National Movement politics, arguing that Senator Michela Barnett Ellis has strong party credentials and defending the party's leadership decisions. On the front page of the business section, the focus remains on the fiscal numbers, government debt growth, and the implications of rising arrears for vendors and state-owned enterprises. Analysts are expected to scrutinize whether the projected surplus can realistically be achieved given outstanding obligations and broader economic pressures. For the full details on these stories and many more, be sure to purchase a copy of today's Nassau Guardian or visit their website to read the full stories and additional coverage in today's edition. This has been your Nassau Guardian highlights for Thursday, February 26, 2026. Enjoy your day, be blessed, and be a blessing.